Cost of sale refers to the amount of money that it costs your organization to close a deal. Another simple sounding one that isn't so simple. The reason this is important is because if you're spending more money than you're taking in, you're not profitable. Sounds ridiculous, but sometimes organizations will let the cost of acquiring a new customer grow to the point that they no longer are making money. So tracking cost of sale is something that sales executives will often do in order to point toward profitability. To say a certain type of product or a certain type of sale is beneficial to the company, whereas another type may be losing money. You may do it for other reasons in terms of getting into a new market, building a brand, expanding, those things, but it's still important to understand whether or not you're making money on each sale. So let's look at some of the calculations that go into cost of sale so that you can understand how to potentially calculate it for your own business. So essentially you're just adding up the share of the cost to close any given deal. The reason I say the share is that sometimes there are direct costs that can be attributed to closing a certain deal, like travel, and we'll talk about that in a second. But often costs are shared over the course of lead gen activities or advertising or other things. And you can just either divide those costs by the number of deals that you close, or look at what individual program each of those deals came out of. How was the lead generated? And we'll talk about that in more detail. So here's some examples. Advertising. Are you spending money to attract the customers, to attract the leads, and how are you spending that money? Lead generation. Are you buying email lists? Are you paying outside sales organizations to generate leads? Are you paying customers to generate leads? How's that happening? Market studies. If you're trying to get into a new market, have you put in a bunch of money into studying who to pitch and why and where? Visits, travel, expenses. Oh, by the way, I should probably throw in trade shows here. That's an important one. Also, is your sales guy going out to visit them? Are they spending money on flights? Are they spending money on dinners and golf during the process? Are there closing costs? Are there legal fees? Do you have to get attorneys to review contracts? Is your CFO spending a bunch of time? What other people in your organization are involved in the closing process? And then billing and maintenance. Is this a difficult process to send invoices to bill? Does that take a lot of time and energy? That's different than someone who's very easy to bill. That actually becomes fairly important as companies scale and grow quickly. I put two little red asterisks next to advertising and billing. Sometimes organizations will split those out and not count them in cost of sale. There is no right and wrong way to do cost of sale. You want to do it in a way that you think accurately reflects whether that's the actual cost of acquiring that customer. That's why you can wash out things like advertising sometimes. If you just share those costs across all customers, then it doesn't really figure into the calculation in terms of establishing which customers are expensive and which customers aren't. So let's look at a rough overview of the sales process again. Market research, prospecting, demo, or the sales conversation, closing, and billing. If that represents a simplification of the sales process, we can look at each segment and say where cost of sale is happening. For market research, you might have studies, you might have travel to visit people, you might hire consultants to help you with it. All that stuff makes the first sale the most expensive one, of course, and then each individual sale is less expensive over time, because this is sort of usually it's an upfront cost that's amortized over the number of accounts you close. So if you know you're only going to close 1 or 2 accounts, then that market research expense becomes pretty significant, or can become significant. If you're going to close thousands of those folks in that market over time, then it'll really go down as a percentage of the total cost of sale. So prospecting is another one, generating lead lists or paying for lead lists, hiring outside sales guys and then paying them to generate leads, paying people finder's fees for introductions, doing rev share with partners. If I introduce you to this person and you close the deal, you pay me X number of percentage points. That goes to cost of sale. That's more expensive than generating the lead yourself. And then in the demo and the sales conversation piece, this is usually the easiest place to track. You've got your sales guys' salaries and their commissions. That definitely goes to cost of sale. If they're not selling more than you're paying them to do it, then you're not going to be profitable. Also, their travel and their expenses. Are they flying all over the country to do it, or are they taking people out to restaurants? That's important as well to track. These are all usually expense reports and simply looking at your full-time employee costs. And then closing, sometimes people forget about this, but if you've got to hire an attorney to oversee documents, That's something that needs to be counted. If you've got to generate a bunch of new documents, it takes a bunch of time for people in your company, and that's something that's important if it's unique to an account, or if it demands more visits from other people in your company during the closing process. Those are all things to watch. So let's think about an enterprise software situation. So let's say that we're trying to close a big deal for database software. In this case, we may have done some market research that turns out to be not so expensive because I'm selling a $200,000 product and I spent $5,000 on studies. And I think I'm going to close, hundreds of these over time. So I'm not going to worry about that. But I did have to get a lead list of CFOs and CTOs that I'm going to go after. I hired an outside sales force, and I'm going to end up paying. I have a partner that brings me a bunch of leads. So I'm going to start splitting my sales into ones that came from the lead list, ones that came from outside sales, and the other that came from partner. And each of these is going to have a dollar sign, a dollar amount associated with it. So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to say, all right, on average, or for this given deal, how much am I paying the sales guy in salary and commissions? Maybe the commissions are different if they come in through these different areas. And then how much did they have to travel? Was it a $200,000 deal that took $20,000 in travel expenses, or was it a $10,000 deal that took $2,000 in travel expenses? Obviously these are different value calculations. So you can start to get an idea of sort of what you're doing when you do cost of sale. You're splitting your sales into certain types, and then you're establishing how much it costs to sell an account of that type. They're usually going to share some of these characteristics across the different accounts. So this is just to give you some ideas of how to figure it out for yourself. It's going to be unique for your business, but that's what the concept of cost of sale is you're supposed to be tracking relatively closely various buckets inside of your client base and how much each of those clients cost to close. Oh, by the way, for online businesses, I should mention that your cost of sale is going to have a lot to do with what you're paying for Google advertising or for search engine optimization. It's the same idea, it just manifests in a slightly different way. You're still paying Google for those leads, and you're paying a consultant for search engine optimization on your website. So you're going to want to take those things into account. If you're spending $50 to get with Google to get someone to your site to make a $30 purchase, then of course it's not going to be worth it. So that's the overall idea of cost of sale: is how much does it cost me to close an account, and is it profitable for my company?